After 20 months of negotiations, European Union leaders have agreed to the UK's Brexit deal. The 27 leaders gave the deal their blessing after less than an hour of discussion. The endorsement brings an end to negotiations which began in March 2017. The president of the European Commission urged the UK's Parliament to ratify the deal, saying it was the best deal possible and the only deal possible. Parliament is expected to vote on the agreement on December the 12th, but the approval of Brexit is far from guaranteed. The UK is scheduled to leave the EU on March 29th. 13 federal agencies issued a report on Friday that outlines the crippling impact of climate change on the economy, food supply, health, and terrain of the United States and the world. The fourth National Climate Estimate warns of expanded wildfires in California and the Southeast, crop failures in the Midwest, disrupted global supply chain, and distressed infrastructure, which would set the U.S. economy back decades. Earlier in the week, the president had tweeted, "Brutal and extended cold blast could shatter all records. Whatever happened to global warming?" But in fact, 2016, 15, and 17 rank as the world's 3 warmest years on record. That's according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Lauren, obviously, President Trump knows what he's doing there. That's a trolling tweet. Weather and climate change are two very different things. The report comes from his administration. 13 federal departments and agencies getting together to put up a flare, wave a red flag about how urgent climate change is.
Yeah, and it's incredible because it seems clear that he tried to bury it by having the report released on Thanksgiving, but luckily the smarty pants people who follow this stuff actually paid attention to it. Look, I think this is going to become a bigger and bigger political issue, particularly as more and more millennials start participating politically. We saw, we talked about this last time I was here. I was concerned that millennials weren't going to turn out at the midterms. Well, it turns out they did. They turned out in huge numbers, and over again the polls show that for millennials, climate change and environmental issues really top the list of concerns. And I think as you see them get more politically active, we're going to see more attention paid to this. But also, I mean, once you start seeing effects on farms, when the climate change effects start being geographically diverse across the United States, not just in California, which it's very easy in some ways for this administration to ignore, this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue for us. There's climate refugees, which are affecting the immigration issues here in Europe and around the world. It's an unavoidable issue, and clearly the federal government sees it, whether or not the administration wants to.
Willie, here's something that Trump will understand, because you certainly would understand the human toll, that by the end of this century, GDP, based on all the things that are having people getting sick and farms and economies, would be off 10%.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
In the Great Depression, GDP was off by 4%. So the only thing that Trump can understand is business and money. The devastation on the economy beyond the human toll would set us back 2x versus what was going on during the Great Depression.
Michael Steele, do you think this changes the dynamic, as Lauren says? I'm thinking particularly about Republicans. We saw a lot of the usual suspects come out over the weekend and say, well, these scientists, they're in it for the money. I think Rick Santorum said there were other people who were questioning the research. This is 13 federal agencies and departments who got together under the Trump administration to put out this climate assessment and say, this is a massive problem. Let's work together to figure out how to slow it down or stop it eventually.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting ironies here, is that within the government itself, you have, very smart policy people, scientists and others who are doing the study, who are doing the work and trying to lay down the tracks for future administrations, not just the current administration, to get ahead of this particular climate issue. The problem they're going to have is the current administration, this is an anathema to them. It is not something that they buy the science, they don't buy the policy. So again, the eyes shift to the Congress, and if you've got members of Congress already, Willie, who are coming out and sort of saying that this is just crazy left-wing science fiction, then what we're going to see is the situation get worse. I don't see a political solution any time in this administration, certainly not coming off the Hill as long as the president has the position he has. So the scientists will continue to put out the reports. This administration will continue to ignore them and make fun of them, or use them as a political cudgel in upcoming elections, and the situation gets worse.
The report may have been buried on the Friday after Thanksgiving, but it couldn't have been more clear. Before we go to break, a note about a good friend of ours here at Morning Joe. Retired Air Force General Michael Hayden, who has led both the CIA and NSA, was hospitalized last week after suffering a stroke. The Hayden Center said in a statement he is receiving expert medical care for which the family is grateful, and we certainly wish the general a very speedy recovery. A very smart guy, Mike, but also just a great guy.
Yeah. Well, you know, he is actually the model for what you want from a civil servant. I mean, the head of the NSA, the head of the CIA, honorable, honest to a fault, unafraid of speaking truth to power, a gentleman, and our friend, as you said, and we can only wish him the speediest of recoveries.
We're thinking about you, General Hayden. Still ahead this morning.